My name is Holly Sinclair, and I'm 34 years old. 18 months ago, my father slid a piece of paper across the table and said, "Sign this. Sell the house to Madison for $250,000, or from today, you are no longer part of this family." 250,000 for a house worth $750,000. The house my grandmother left me, her only grandchild who stayed by her side for the last 5 years of her life. They thought I would cry. They thought I would crumble. What they didn't know was that before that family meeting even took place, I had already made a phone call to the CEO of the company where my sister works. Before I continue, if you find this story worth watching, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy it. And if you'd like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let me start from the day my grandmother passed away. Growing up in the Sinclair household meant living in Madison's shadow. My parents never hid their preference. At dinner tables, during holidays, in front of relatives, the comparisons were constant. Madison was the golden child, ambitious, driven, destined for greatness. I was the afterthought. "Madison will go far," my mother used to say, her eyes bright with pride. "And Holly, well, at least she's kind-hearted, as if that were a consolation prize." When I chose to become an elementary school teacher, my father's disappointment was palpable. He stopped asking about my work entirely. No more "how's the job?" No more "any promotions coming up?" Just silence where interest should have been. But when Madison landed her position at Mercer and Associates, a prestigious real estate development firm, my parents couldn't stop talking about it. They told every aunt, every uncle, every neighbor who would listen. Their younger daughter was climbing the corporate ladder. Their younger daughter was going places. At family gatherings, the pattern was always the same. Everyone would crowd around Madison, asking about her latest deals, her corner office, her company car. And me? I sat at the edge of the conversation, invisible. "So Madison, tell us about that new project downtown," Uncle Robert would say. No one ever asked what I was teaching that semester. No one wondered about the students whose lives I was shaping. To them, teaching children to read wasn't an accomplishment worth discussing. The first sign I was being dismissed happened so gradually I almost missed it. Somewhere along the way, I had become furniture in my own family, present but unnoticed, functional but unremarkable. I accepted it then. I wouldn't accept it forever. Grandmother Eleanor was different. She saw me, really saw me, when no one else bothered to look. Every Sunday afternoon, I'd drive to her Victorian house on Maple Street, and we'd sit on her porch drinking sweet tea while she told stories about her youth. "You remind me of myself, Holly," she once said. Quiet strength. People underestimate that. When the doctors diagnosed her with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, everything changed. They gave her 18 months, maybe 2 years if she was lucky. Madison was too busy to visit. A new project at work, an important client dinner, a conference in Chicago. There was always something more pressing than a dying grandmother. My parents came once, stayed for 45 minutes, and never returned. "It's too hard to see her like this," my mother explained over the phone, as if their discomfort mattered more than Grandma's loneliness. So I made a choice. I took a leave of absence from teaching. I moved into the guest bedroom of that Victorian house. For 5 years, I was there, administering medications, cooking her favorite meals, holding her hand through the long nights when the pain was unbearable. My mother called once during that time, not to ask how Grandma was doing, not to offer help. "You're wasting your time, Holly," she said. "It's not like she has anything to leave you." I hung up without responding. Grandma Eleanor passed away on a Tuesday morning in April, the sunrise painting her bedroom in shades of gold. Her hand was in mine. She was smiling. "I've prepared everything for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't let anyone take it away." I didn't understand those words, not until the lawyer read her will. The reading took place in a downtown law office 3 weeks after the funeral. Mahogany furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the kind of room that smelled like old money and important decisions. My parents sat on one side of the conference table, Madison on the other. I took the chair nearest the door. Mr. Patterson, Grandma's attorney, cleared his throat and began reading. I, Eleanor Marie Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath my property located at 847 Maple Street to my granddaughter, Holly Elizabeth Sinclair, the only one who stayed when everyone else left. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went pale. My mother's mouth fell open. But it was Madison's reaction that I remember most vividly, her perfectly manicured fingers curling into fists, her jaw tightening with barely contained rage. "There must be some mistake," Madison said, her voice sharp. "Grandma she couldn't have been thinking clearly when she signed this." Mr. Patterson removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. "I assure you, Ms. Sinclair, your grandmother was fully competent. This document was witnessed, notarized, and executed according to every legal standard. $750,000. That was the market value of the Victorian house on Maple Street. And Grandma had left every brick, every floorboard, every memory to me." As the meeting concluded, Mr. Patterson handed me a sealed envelope. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this," he said quietly. "She said you should only open it when necessary." I tucked it into my purse without looking at it. Walking out of that office, I felt Madison's eyes boring into my back. When I turned to face her, I saw something I'd never seen before. She was looking at me like I was the enemy. The pressure started 3 days after the funeral. My parents showed up at the house, my house now, without calling first. They sat in Grandma's living room like they owned the place, their expressions a carefully rehearsed mixture of concern and disappointment. "We need to talk about the house," my father began. "What about it?" "It's not right, Holly. One person keeping all of this." He gestured at the high ceilings, the original hardwood floors, the antique furniture Grandma had collected over decades. "Family should share," my mother nodded vigorously. "Madison needs a place. She's thinking about her future. Marriage, children. This house would be perfect for her." "And what about my future?" I asked. They exchanged a glance, the kind of look parents share when a child says something naive. "Sweetheart," my mother said, "you're a teacher. You don't need a house like this. Madison is building something. She has ambitions." There it was. The same message I'd heard my entire life, dressed up in new clothes. Every day for the next 2 weeks, they returned, sometimes together, sometimes separately. My father threatened. My mother cried. They took turns playing good cop and bad cop, their scripts so predictable I could have written them myself. "If you don't share this with your sister," my father finally said, "you won't have a family anymore." I lay awake that night, doing the math. If I sold to Madison at the price they were demanding, I'd lose $500,000. I'd lose my home. I'd lose the last piece of Grandma Eleanor I had left. But if I refused, I'd lose my family. The choice seemed impossible. Until I realized something important. I could lose my family, but I couldn't lose myself. They called it a family meeting. It felt more like an ambush. My parents arrived at 7 sharp, settling into the living room chairs like judges taking their seats. Madison showed up 20 minutes late, breezing through the front door in a designer blazer that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She didn't apologize for her tardiness. People like Madison never do. "Let's get this over with," she said, not bothering to sit. "I have a dinner at 9. My father pulled out a document, a sales agreement, already drafted. "Here's what's going to happen, Holly. You sign this. You sell the house to Madison for $250,000. We put this whole mess behind us." I looked at the number, then I looked at my father. "The market value is $750,000, Madison laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Market value? Holly, do you even know what that means?" She crossed her arms. "Have you ever sold a house? Have you ever negotiated a real estate deal? I work in this industry. Trust me, $250 is generous. It's 1/3 of what the house is worth." "It's family price," my mother interjected. That's how families work. The conversation circled like a predator around wounded prey. Every time I raised an objection, they had a counter. Every time I stood my ground, they pushed harder. This is a family decision, my father said finally. But this is my house. Madison stepped closer, her heels clicking against Grandma's hardwood floors. It was Grandma's house. You just happened to be standing in it when she died. I was there for 5 years, Madison. And I had a career to build. Some of us have real responsibilities. She mentioned something about a project that required the house. She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. After Madison and my father left, my mother stayed behind. She waited until their cars pulled away, then turned to me with tears already forming in her eyes. I'd seen this performance before, at school plays, at graduations, whenever she needed something from me. Holly, baby, can we talk? Just us? I gestured to the couch. She sat, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd conveniently brought. You're tearing this family apart, she said. Do you understand that? Everything your father and I built, everything we sacrificed, you're throwing it all away for a building. It's not just a building, Mom. It's Grandma's home. It's my home now. It's wood and nails. Her voice cracked perfectly on cue. Family is blood. Family is forever. This house will crumble someday. But family? Family is supposed to last. She reached for my hand. I let her take it. Don't you remember all those nights I stayed up with you when you were sick? Don't you remember how hard we worked to give you a good life? And this is how you repay us? The guilt rose in my chest like bile. She knew exactly which buttons to push. She'd been pushing them my whole life. I love you, Mom. I love this family, but I can't sell something Grandma trusted me to protect. Her expression shifted. The tears dried up faster than they'd appeared. I'm giving you 1 week, Holly. She stood, smoothing her skirt. 1 week to come to your senses. After that, don't bother calling me Mom anymore. She walked out without looking back. The front door closed with a sound like a verdict. I sat alone in Grandma's living room, surrounded by her furniture, her photographs, her memory. And I wondered if keeping this house would cost me everything else. The phone rang at midnight. I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, when Madison's name lit up my screen. I considered not answering, but something told me I needed to hear what she had to say. Did I wake you? Her voice was different now, cold, professional, stripped of the theatrical warmth she performed for our parents. What do you want, Madison? I want you to understand something. A pause, ice clinking in a glass. This little standoff you're staging? It's cute, but you need to know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. My sister. She laughed softly. I'm not just your sister, Holly. I'm a senior project manager at one of the largest real estate firms in the state. I have connections you can't even imagine. Lawyers, contractors, city officials, people who owe me favors. Is that a threat? It's information. Another pause. You work at a public school, don't you? It would be such a shame if someone started raising questions about a certain teacher's competence. Budget cuts are brutal these days. They're always looking for excuses to let people go. My blood ran cold. You wouldn't. I wouldn't have to. I know people who know people. That's how the real world works, Holly. Maybe they didn't teach that in your little classroom. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the darkness for a long time after that, my phone still clutched in my hand. On the nightstand, Grandma's photograph smiled at me from its silver frame. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and typed 3 words into the search bar. Mercer and Associates Leadership. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I was done being prey. I remembered Grandma's words. Don't let anyone take it away. The sealed envelope had been sitting in my purse for weeks. That night, I finally opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter on Grandma's lavender stationery and a business card. My dearest Holly, if you're reading this, it means someone is trying to take what I've given you. I knew this might happen. Your parents never understood the value of things that can't be bought. If you need to keep the house while still protecting yourself, call the number below. Linda Torres was my attorney for many years before Patterson. She specializes in creative real estate solutions. She'll help you find a way. Remember, keeping something doesn't always mean holding on to it with both hands. Sometimes the smartest grip is the loosest one. All my love. Grandma Eleanor. Linda Torres. The name was vaguely familiar. A friend from college, maybe? I'd lost touch with so many people over the years. I called the next morning. Holly Sinclair? Linda's voice was warm but professional. Eleanor told me you might reach out someday. I'm glad you did. I need help. My family is trying to force me to sell my grandmother's house for a fraction of its value. Tell me everything. I did. Every threat, every manipulation, every midnight phone call. When I finished, Linda was quiet for a moment. Have you ever heard of a sale-leaseback agreement? No. It's simple, really. You sell the property at full market value, but you negotiate a long-term lease as part of the deal. The buyer gets an investment property, you get the money and the right to keep living there. My heart began to beat faster. But who would buy a house where the seller still lives? Linda's answer changed everything. Tell me, Linda said, where exactly is your grandmother's house? 847 Maple Street, the Victorian district. Silence on the other end. Then a low whistle. Holly, are you sitting down? Why? Because I just had a very interesting meeting last week. Mercer and Associates, one of the biggest real estate development firms in the region, is actively searching for a property in your exact neighborhood. My stomach dropped. Mercer and Associates, that's your sister's company. Yes, I know. Linda's voice carried a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. Amusement, maybe. Their CEO, Jonathan Mercer, wants to establish a satellite office on that side of town. High-end residential conversion. Your grandmother's house would be perfect. The irony wasn't lost on me. Madison worked for a company whose CEO was looking for exactly what I had. What's Mercer like? I asked. Strictly professional. Hates drama, especially personal drama. He's the kind of man who evaluates everything through a business lens. If a deal makes sense, he does it. If it doesn't, he walks away. Emotion doesn't factor into his decisions. I thought about Madison's threats, her connections, her certainty that she could make my life miserable. If Mercer buys my house, I said slowly, Madison would have to work there. Every week, from what I understand. He wants the satellite office to handle regional accounts. Project managers would rotate through regularly. The poetic justice of it was almost too perfect. Madison demanding my home, then being forced to report to it under her boss's authority. This isn't revenge, I said, more to myself than to Linda. No, it isn't. It's business. I could hear her smile through the phone. And it's a damn good deal for everyone involved. Well, almost everyone. Set up the meeting. My parents chose the nuclear option. They called it a family dinner. But what they really wanted was an audience for my public humiliation. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone gathered at my parents' house on a Saturday evening, the table set with Grandma's china. The irony of that particular choice wasn't lost on me. Halfway through the main course, my father stood up. He clinked his wine glass with a fork, commanding attention like a general addressing his troops. I want to discuss something important, he announced, something that affects all of us. The room fell silent, forks paused mid-air, eyes turned to him. As most of you know, my mother left her house to Holly. He paused, letting the words settle. What you may not know is that Holly has refused to share it with Madison. She's chosen a building over her own family. Murmurs rippled through the room. Disapproving glances landed on me like physical weights. My mother began to cry, loud, theatrical sobs that drew sympathetic looks from the relatives. She's changed since Eleanor passed, Mom wailed. I don't even recognize my own daughter anymore. Aunt Carol reached over to pat her hand. That's terrible, Patricia. Just terrible. Uncle Robert shook his head at me. Holly, you should really think about family. Madison needs that house for her future. She has plans. Plans for marriage, my mother added. Children. A life. And there it was. The implication that my life, my teaching career, my 5 years of caregiving amounted to nothing worth considering. Holly, my father said, his voice hard. Everyone in this room knows what the right thing to do is. 18 pairs of eyes stared at me, waiting for surrender. I felt very small and very alone. But I also felt something else. Something I'd never felt before. Clarity. Madison wasn't finished. She stood up from her chair, smoothing her designer dress, and walked slowly around the table until she was standing directly behind me. I felt her shadow fall across my shoulders. Let me explain something to everyone here, she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. My sister is a school teacher. She teaches children how to color inside the lines and sing the alphabet song. Scattered laughter, condescending smiles. She doesn't understand real estate. She doesn't understand investments. She doesn't understand anything about building wealth or planning for the future. Madison placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture of a superior addressing an underling. Holly was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time when Grandma got sick. That's all. I was there for 5 years, I said quietly. Anyone could have done what you did, changed some bed sheets, made some soup. Madison shrugged. It's not exactly brain surgery. Aunt Carol nodded vigorously. Uncle Robert murmured agreement. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood, who had known me since childhood, who were now treating me like a stranger, or worse, like a villain. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about the house. It had never been about the house. Madison didn't want Grandma's property because she needed it. She wanted it because I had it. Because for the first time in our lives, I possessed something she couldn't have. And that was intolerable to her. You think you won something, Madison whispered, low enough that only I could hear. But you have no idea who you're playing against. This is my game, Holly, and I always win. I said nothing. But inside, something shifted. The fear dissolved. In its place was steel. I stood up. No dramatic speech, no tearful defense, just the simple act of rising from my chair while 18 people watched in stunned silence. I looked at my father first, then my mother, then Madison. Then slowly I let my gaze travel around the entire table, face by face, relative by relative. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. Thank you all for showing me exactly where I stand in this family. Holly, sit down, my father commanded. No. The word hung in the air like a foreign object. When had anyone in this room ever heard me say no? I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard chairs scraping, voices rising in protest, my mother calling my name with practiced desperation. I didn't turn around. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I sat in my car for a full minute, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, from adrenaline. Then I pulled out my phone and called Linda. It's Holly. How did the dinner go? About as well as you'd expect. I started the engine. Contact Jonathan Mercer. Tell him I'm ready to discuss terms. Are you sure? Once we start this process. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. A pause. I'll make the call first thing tomorrow. I drove home through quiet streets, past houses where normal families were having normal dinners without ultimatums or public humiliations. When I pulled into Grandma's driveway, my driveway, I sat in the darkness and looked up at the Victorian house that had become the center of so much conflict. I don't need to defend myself with words, I whispered to no one. I'll let the paperwork speak instead. 2 weeks later, Jonathan Mercer sat across from me in my living room. I want to pause here for a moment. If you've ever been dismissed by your own family because of the choices you made, Whether it was your career, your partner, or anything else, drop the word boundary in the comments below. I need to know I'm not alone in this. And if you're curious about what happens when Madison's CEO walks through my door, stay with me. The best part is coming. Jonathan Mercer was not what I expected. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that filled a room without trying. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, but his handshake was surprisingly warm. "Ms. Sinclair," he said, surveying Grandma's living room with professional interest. "This is quite a property. Victorian architecture, original moldings, exceptional location. I can see why your grandmother loved it. She spent 43 years here, and you spent 5 of those years caring for her." He turned to face me. "That kind of dedication is rare. I respect it." We walked through this house together. The formal dining room, the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the sunroom that overlooked the garden. Mercer asked thoughtful questions about the property's history, its maintenance, its potential. When the tour was complete, we settled into chairs across from each other. "Linda explained your proposal," he said. "Full market value sale with a 15-year leaseback. It's unconventional, but it works for what I have in mind. The ground floor would convert beautifully to office space. You'd retain the upper floors as a private residence." "And the price?" $750,000. Fair market value. He paused. "May I ask why you're doing this? You could simply refuse to sell." I considered lying. I considered deflecting. Instead, I told the truth. "Because certain people are trying to take this property through pressure and manipulation. I need to protect it legally, in a way they can't undo." Mercer nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Ms. Sinclair. There's something else you should know." I met his eyes. "Madison Sinclair is my sister." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "I had a feeling." "You knew?" Mercer leaned back in his chair. "Madison talks about her family occasionally. Mentions a sister who teaches elementary school. When Linda contacted me about a property being sold by a schoolteacher named Sinclair, I put the pieces together." "And you're still interested?" "Ms. Sinclair, I don't make business decisions based on employee family drama. I make them based on value." He gestured at the room around us. "This property has value. Your proposal has value. Whatever is happening between you and your sister is not my concern, as long as it doesn't affect the transaction." Something loosened in my chest. I'd been prepared for questions, for complications, for the deal to fall apart once he knew the connection. Instead, he pulled out a folder. I had my attorneys draft the paperwork. Standard sale leaseback agreement. 15-year lease term, fixed monthly rate below market as agreed. You retain exclusive residential rights to the upper floors. We convert the ground floor to a satellite office. I read every page. Linda had already reviewed it, had already confirmed that everything was legitimate. But I needed to see it for myself. The purchase price? $750,000. The lease term? 15 years, renewable. The monthly rent? Significantly below what I could afford, thanks to careful negotiation. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pen. Not from fear, from relief. I signed my name on the final page. Jonathan Mercer countersigned. The notary stamped the document. "Congratulations," Mercer said, shaking my hand. "You've just made a very smart decision." The money would arrive in my account within 72 hours. $750,000 minus closing costs. And I would still wake up every morning in my grandmother's house? "There's one more thing," Mercer said. "The satellite office opens next month. Madison will be assigned there." I smiled. The invitation arrived at Madison's desk 4 weeks later. I know this because Linda told me. Mercer's assistant had confirmed the details. A company-wide event celebrating the launch of Mercer & Associates' newest satellite office. Attendance mandatory for all senior project managers. The address was 847 Maple Street, my address. On the evening of the launch, I stood at my front window and watched the catering trucks arrive. White tents bloomed in the garden. String lights wound through the ancient oak trees. Everything Grandma had built was being transformed into a corporate showcase, temporarily beautifully. Cars began pulling into the circular driveway. Executives in expensive suits, staff members clutching champagne flutes, board members admiring the architecture. And then I saw her. Madison's silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb. She stepped out, adjusting her blazer, checking her phone. She hadn't looked at the house yet, too busy texting, probably coordinating some last-minute detail. Then she looked up. I will never forget her face in that moment. The confusion first, followed by disbelief, followed by something close to horror. She stood frozen on the sidewalk while colleagues streamed past her, greeting each other, complimenting the venue. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Our eyes met across the lawn. "Hello, Madison," I called out, my voice carrying clearly through the evening air. "Welcome to the new office." She didn't move, couldn't move. A young associate touched her arm. "Ms. Sinclair, are you all right?" Madison's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "This is—" She swallowed hard. "This is my sister's house." "Your sister?" The associate looked between us, clearly confused. "I thought Mr. Mercer bought this property from someone named Holly Sinclair." "He did," I said, walking down the porch steps. "I'm Holly, and this is still my home." The official program began at 7. Jonathan Mercer took his place at the podium that had been set up in what was once Grandma's living room. The room was packed: executives, managers, investors, board members. Madison stood near the back, her face carefully composed, her knuckles white around her champagne glass. "Thank you all for joining us this evening," Mercer began. "Tonight marks an important milestone for Mercer and Associates. This satellite office represents our commitment to expanding into new markets while maintaining the quality and character our clients expect." He paused, scanning the crowd. "I want to particularly acknowledge the person who made this acquisition possible." He turned toward me. "Ms. Holly Sinclair, who sold us this magnificent property and who will continue to reside in the upper floors as part of a long-term leaseback agreement." Applause rippled through the room. I nodded in acknowledgement, acutely aware of Madison's gaze burning into my back. "Ms. Sinclair demonstrated exceptional professionalism and business acumen throughout our negotiations," Mercer continued. "Her grandmother maintained this property beautifully for over 4 decades, and I'm pleased that we've structured a deal that honors that legacy while serving our company's needs." The applause grew louder. Several executives approached me afterward to shake my hand, to compliment the house, to express admiration for the creative deal structure. And through it all, Madison stood motionless. When Mercer made his final announcement that senior project managers would rotate through this office on a weekly basis, with Madison heading the regional accounts division, I heard someone gasp. Madison's colleagues turned to look at her with new expressions, curious, knowing. "Isn't this your sister's house?" someone whispered. Madison didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everyone already knew. They arrived within the hour. Madison must have called them the moment she could escape the crowd. My parents' sedan screeched into the driveway just as the last guests were leaving, their headlights cutting through the evening darkness like accusations. My father was out of the car before the engine stopped. "What did you do?" His voice cracked with fury. "You sold the house? To outsiders?" "I sold the house at fair market value," I said calmly. "And I negotiated a lease that allows me to continue living here." "That's not the point." He stepped closer, his face reddening. "This was supposed to stay in the family." "It was staying in the family, Dad, with me. That's what Grandma wanted." My mother appeared beside him, mascara already streaking down her cheeks. "How could you do this to us? How could you humiliate Madison in front of her entire company?" "I didn't humiliate anyone. I made a business decision." "Business decision?" My father laughed bitterly. "You're a school teacher. What do you know about business?" The words that might have wounded me a month ago now bounced off like rain on stone. I know enough to get full market value for a property you wanted me to sell for a third of its worth. I met his eyes steadily. I know enough to protect what Grandma left me. And Madison? You didn't think about what this would do to her career? Madison threatened my career first. She told me she would use her connections to get me fired. I let that sink in. I simply made sure I had options. My parents exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. I love this family, I said quietly. But love doesn't mean letting people take what doesn't belong to them. My father opened his mouth, then for the first time I could remember, he closed it without speaking. Word spreads quickly in corporate environments. Within a week, everyone at Mercer and Associates knew the story. The ambitious project manager, who had tried to pressure her own sister out of an inherited home. The sister who had quietly sold the property to their mutual employer. The poetic justice of Madison now reporting to work at the very address she had demanded be surrendered to her. Madison couldn't complain to HR. There was nothing to complain about. She couldn't appeal to Mercer. He had already made his admiration for my business acumen publicly known. She couldn't even avoid the satellite office, since Mercer had specifically assigned her to the regional accounts division housed there. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Madison's car pulled into my driveway at 8:45 a.m. I made a point of being visible, watering the garden as she walked past, collecting my mail from the box near the entrance, drinking coffee on the porch while she hurried toward the converted office space on the ground floor. We never spoke, but we didn't need to. Her colleagues noticed everything. The whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the subtle glances exchanged behind her back, the shift in how people treated her. No longer the rising star, but the woman whose family drama had become office legend. "Is that really your sister's house?" I overheard a junior associate ask her once. Madison's response was clipped. "It's company property. But she still lives here. That's so awkward." Madison didn't answer, didn't. The worst part for her, I think, wasn't the professional embarrassment. It was the loss of control. She had spent her entire life accumulating power, cultivating influence, building a reputation as someone who always got what she wanted. And here was proof, twice a week, that she didn't. My parents stopped calling. For 3 months, there was nothing. No demands, no guilt trips, no surprise visits. The silence was strange at first. I had grown so accustomed to their constant pressure that its absence felt like a phantom limb. I didn't reach out. They needed space to process what had happened, and I needed space to heal from what they had done. Then, on a Sunday morning in October, my phone rang. "Holly?" My mother's voice was different, smaller somehow, less certain. "Hi, Mom." A long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her wrestling with words she wasn't used to saying. I just wanted to check on you." Another pause. "Are you doing okay?" It wasn't an apology. I hadn't expected one. But it was something. A crack in the wall she had built between us. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm good, actually. The house looks nice. I drove by last week." She cleared her throat. "The garden looks just like when your grandmother was alive." I try to keep it the way she would have wanted. More silence. Then, quietly, "She would have been proud of you, Holly. What you did, standing up for yourself. She would have loved that." I felt tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness, from something more complicated. "Thank you, Mom. Maybe we could have lunch sometime? Just the two of us?" "I'd like that." When I hung up, I sat in Grandma's rocking chair and watched the autumn leaves drift past the window. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was forgiven. Not yet. But something had shifted. The relationship wasn't over. It was just operating under new terms. My terms. Madison came to see me 6 months after the satellite office opened. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when I heard the knock, not on the office door downstairs, but on my private entrance. 3 sharp raps, then silence. When I opened the door, She was standing there in her work clothes, her professional mask firmly in place. But her eyes told a different story. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked into the kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd eaten Grandma's cookies as children, where we'd fought over the last slice of birthday cake, where our entire history was embedded in the worn wooden floors. "I thought we should talk," she said. "Like sisters." "Okay." Madison sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table. "I never expected you to do something like this. All those years, I thought—" She trailed off. "You thought I would always give in." Yes. She met my eyes. I did. "Why are you here, Madison?" She shifted in her chair. "I want us to have a real relationship again. What happened? The house, the company, all of it. Maybe we can move past it." "Can we?" "I'd like to try." She paused. "Also, I was wondering, since you have a good relationship with Mercer now, maybe you could talk to him about adjusting the office rotation? Having me report here twice a week is difficult." And there it was. Not reconciliation, negotiation. "Madison," I said slowly, "being sisters doesn't work on contracts. But respect? That does." She stared at me, waiting for more. "I'm open to rebuilding our relationship," I continued. "But not because you want something from me. That's what got us here in the first place." She left without an answer. But I saw something new in her expression as she walked out. Something that might have been understanding. "Now I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done?" Drop an A in the comments if you would forgive and try to rebuild the relationship completely. Drop a B if you would keep your distance like I did. And if you want to hear more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. We're almost at the end now. A year passed. I still teach elementary school. I still grade papers at Grandma's kitchen table. I still wake up every morning in the house where she loved me when no one else would. But everything is different now. The ground floor hums with activity during business hours, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, meetings taking place in the room where Grandma used to host her book club. Then 5 o'clock comes, and the silence returns. My silence. My peace. I kept everything that mattered. Her rocking chair sits by the window where it always did. Her cookbook, stained with decades of meals, still leans against the counter. The lavender sachets she made every spring still scent my closet. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning, I swear I can feel her presence. Not as a ghost, nothing so dramatic. More like an echo of love that soaked into these walls over 43 years and never quite faded. $750,000 sits in my investment account. Security I never imagined having, freedom I never knew I needed. And yet money isn't the victory. The victory is walking through my own front door without fear. The victory is knowing that no one can force me out of what's rightfully mine. The victory is understanding, finally, that my worth was never determined by my parents' approval or Madison's achievements. Grandma knew that. She always knew. "You remind me of myself, Holly. Quiet strength." I understand now what she meant. Quiet strength isn't about shouting louder than everyone else. It's about knowing your value so deeply that no one can convince you to sell it short. She didn't just leave me a house. She left me a blueprint for how to protect myself. People ask me sometimes if I regret what happened, if I wish things had gone differently with my family, if the price of keeping this house was worth paying. Here's what I tell them. I didn't cut ties with my family. I didn't burn bridges or issue ultimatums of my own. I simply changed the terms of our relationship. For the first time in 34 years, those terms favor me. My mother and I have lunch once a month now. She doesn't apologize for what happened, not in words anyway. But she asks about my students. She remembers their names. She listens when I talk. My father keeps his distance. I suspect his pride is still wounded. Maybe it always will be. But he nods when he sees me. And once, at Christmas, He said my grandmother would have been proud of how I maintain her garden. Madison and I exist in a careful truce. We're not friends, we may never be. But when she walks past my porch on her way to the office, she sometimes waves. And I wave back. Is that forgiveness? I don't know. Maybe it's something more complicated. Something that doesn't fit neatly into a single word. What I do know is this. The most powerful response to injustice isn't anger. It isn't revenge. It isn't even confrontation. It's a decision made with clarity, executed with precision, and defended with absolute certainty. My grandmother understood that. She gave me the tools, the connections, and the courage to protect what she built. And in the end, the strongest boundary I could set wasn't a wall. It was a contract. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. You have the right to protect what's yours. And sometimes, the quietest signatures speak louder than the loudest arguments. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you saw yourself in this story, whether as Holly or maybe even as Madison, remember that it's never too late to set boundaries. Leave me a comment with your thoughts. What would you have done? And if you want more stories like this one, check out the videos in the description. See you in the next story.